He was shaken when he discovered that his daughter, who had been missing for many years, could be his son's nanny. Between secrets and betrayals, he faces the truth, uncovering his family's hidden past. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. Night fell over the silent mansion, and the cold air seeped through the slightly open windows, carrying with it the distant sound of the ocean waves. Ricardo, sitting in his office, watched the long shadows forming on the walls. The distant city lights contrasted with the darkness of the room. He was surrounded by luxury, but the large rooms and pristine hallways only amplified the emptiness he felt inside. It was a night like any other until something broke the monotony. A soft sound echoed through the corridors, a song, a melody he hadn't heard in years. Ricardo rose from his leather chair, his heart racing with the sudden memory. He followed the sound, his steps muffled by the carpet. When he reached the slightly open door of Gabriel's room, his 4-year-old son, he found Mariana, the young nanny, gently rocking him in her arms while singing a lullaby. Ricardo remained motionless, listening to the melody resonating in the air. He recognized every note, every pause. It was the same song Clara, his late wife, used to sing to Helena, his daughter who had disappeared 20 years ago. The memory hit him like a knife to the chest, bringing back memories he had long tried to bury. His eyes fixed on Mariana, who seemed unaware of his presence, focused on soothing Gabriel. There was something about her, a delicate way she held the child, a distant look that reminded him of Helena. Noticing Ricardo's presence, Mariana stopped the song and gave him a shy smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ricardo, I hope I didn't bother you. It was the only song that came to mind," she said, trying to justify her choice. He just nodded, his mind still caught in the memories of Clara and Helena. Mariana, unaware of the disturbance in his gaze, turned her attention back to Gabriel, who was now sleeping peacefully. Ricardo left the room with his heart racing and headed to his office, where he poured himself a whiskey to try to push away the memories invading his mind. He never talked about Helena. The pain of loss and the mystery surrounding her disappearance had eroded any desire to expose his emotions, but now that song had opened a crack in his wall of silence. Deep down, an idea began to take shape. Why did Mariana know that specific song? And why did she seem so familiar to him? Ricardo decided he needed to learn more about the young nanny. She had come into their lives only recently, but since then, she had become a constant and dedicated presence, caring for Gabriel with affection. However, this coincidence left him unsettled. Later that same night, while Julia slept beside him in bed, Ricardo began discreetly searching on his phone. He looked for any information about Mariana's past, but the results were vague. He found nothing that explained the origin of the song, but he discovered that she had been raised in an orphanage with few memories of her early years. The doubt would not leave him alone, and he wondered if he should talk to Julia about it. But there was something about his wife that always made him hesitate. Julia had a way of controlling situations, deflecting any topic she considered irrelevant or bothersome. He knew that if he spoke to her about his suspicions, she would probably discourage him, saying it was just an insignificant coincidence. So, he decided to keep it a secret for now. The next morning, when he saw Mariana in the garden, Ricardo observed her from a distance, trying to identify something about her that could explain the connection he felt. Mariana, unaware of his watchful eyes, played with Gabriel, making the boy laugh as they blew soap bubbles into the air. Mariana's genuine smile and her sweet way of dealing with Gabriel only deepened Ricardo's discomfort. Something about her seemed to evoke an echo from the past that he couldn't ignore. When he returned to his office, the resolution was clear in his mind. He needed to investigate Mariana's past. He didn't know yet what he expected to find, but he felt, with a strength he hadn't experienced in a long time, that this young woman might be connected to the secrets that had haunted him since Helena's disappearance. And so, without knowing where this would lead him, Ricardo took the first step toward a truth that would change his life forever. The sun was starting to rise over the mansion, bathing the garden in golden hues. After a sleepless night, Ricardo left early for a walk around the property. Questions about Mariana pounded in his head, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the young woman was hiding something important. He needed to understand more about her story, especially the orphanage where she had been raised. Ricardo waited for Julia to leave for her morning appointment before calling Augusto, an old friend and former police officer. Augusto had been a great ally during the search for Helena, but over time, the pain and frustration had driven them apart. Now, Ricardo needed his friend's expertise and connections to find out what Mariana was hiding. The call was brief, but decisive. Upon hearing the name of the orphanage, Augusto promised to investigate and bring answers in a few days. Meanwhile, when Julia returned home, she noticed Ricardo's restlessness. "You seem distant lately. Is something bothering you?" she asked, with a scrutinizing look. Ricardo masked his tension, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's just work. Nothing to worry about." Julia narrowed her eyes, but let the subject drop. She had always known how to manipulate situations to her advantage, and Ricardo wasn't ready to confront her yet. However, the distance between them deepened with each passing day. Ricardo knew that somehow Julia would sense that something was different. He needed to act quickly before she interfered with his investigations. While waiting for Augusto's information, Ricardo continued to observe Mariana closely. He began asking subtle questions about her childhood, trying to understand more about how she had grown up in the orphanage. Mariana answered with the ease of someone used to talking about the past, but her words always carried a shadow of melancholy. She mentioned that she had no memories of her life before the age of 4, when she was found near a road and taken to the orphanage. These details only fueled Ricardo's curiosity. He felt there was a story behind the gaps in Mariana's memory, something that might be related to his own loss. However, he couldn't ask too many questions at once, so as not to arouse suspicion. A few days later, Augusto contacted him with the first bits of information. They met at a discreet cafe in the city, far from Julia's watchful eyes. Augusto, always meticulous, brought a folder with documents about the orphanage where Mariana had lived. "This place has a dark history, Ricardo," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "In the last 20 years, there have been reports of irregular adoptions, and some children disappeared without a trace." Ricardo flipped through the documents with trembling hands. Augusto's words echoed in his mind as he came across reports of archived cases and names that meant nothing to him, at least not yet. "What about Mariana?" Ricardo asked, his voice shaky. "Is there anything that connects her to these cases?" Augusto paused before responding, making Ricardo lean in even closer, eager for every word. "She was found without any documents, no clue as to who her parents were. They just said she was found wandering near a road, alone, on a cold night. The description is vague, but it matches the time when your daughter disappeared." Augusto gave Ricardo a worried look, as the coincidences seemed to disturb him more and more. Ricardo felt the weight of the discovery, as if something inside him was turning upside down. He still couldn't confirm anything, but the possibility was like a thread of hope he clung to. "Keep investigating. I want to know everything about her story, every detail you can find," he requested with determination. Augusto nodded, understanding the urgency of his friend. When Ricardo returned to the mansion, he found Mariana in the garden playing with Gabriel. The boy ran between the trees, laughing, while she followed with a tender gaze. Ricardo watched her from afar, trying to piece together the puzzle forming before his eyes. Somewhere between the nanny's innocence and the secrets of the past, he felt that the answer to Helena's mystery was about to emerge. However, Julia seemed to notice that something was out of place. That night, during dinner, she gave Ricardo a sharp look. "You've been very close to Mariana lately. Any special reason?" she asked, her voice laden with suspicion. Ricardo smiled in a controlled manner, hiding his worries. "She's a good employee, that's all," he replied. But he knew Julia wouldn't be satisfied with that explanation for long. Ricardo had to be careful, because now the feeling that he was about to uncover something important was accompanied by a new fear. What if Julia was somehow involved in all of this? He didn't know how far she would go to protect her own interests, but one thing was certain: he wasn't willing to back down until he found the truth. The wind blew cold that morning, and the trees around the mansion swayed slightly. Ricardo was in his office, looking out the window as he reflected on the information Augusto had brought him. The coincidences between Helena's disappearance and Mariana's past haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper, something he hadn't yet discovered. At noon, Ricardo found Mariana in the kitchen preparing Gabriel's snack. He took the opportunity to strike up a conversation, trying to get more details about her time at the orphanage. "Do you remember what it was like there?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Mariana hesitated, spreading butter on the bread. "It was a sad place. We didn't have much, but the caregivers did what they could. I never knew much about what happened before I got there. I just remember being alone, scared, until they found me by the road." Ricardo nodded, but his mind was far away, trying to connect the pieces of that story. He didn't want to press her further. He decided that Augusto should continue the investigation while he observed and tried not to draw Julia's attention. Even so, something about Mariana seemed to awaken memories he had tried to forget, and it left him unsettled. That same afternoon, Augusto called Ricardo, asking him to meet him at the police station where he still had contacts. Ricardo rushed there, feeling that he was about to discover something important. When he arrived, Augusto greeted him with a serious expression. "I found something that might be relevant," he said, handing him a new folder. "There are a number of reports of missing children during the time Mariana was found. The orphanage where she grew up received donations from an adoption network that, in reality, covered up the removal of children from their biological families." Ricardo quickly leafed through the documents, each page revealing another fragment of the mystery. The adoption network was involved in illegal practices, using false records to hide the children's true identities. "Are you telling me that Mariana might have been taken from her family against their will?" Ricardo asked, his voice trembling with tension. Augusto nodded, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "It's a possibility, Ricardo. And considering what you've told me about Julia, she might know more than she's letting on." His friend's words put Ricardo on alert. He knew Julia was controlling, but the idea that she could be directly involved in this scheme was frightening. Ricardo felt the weight of the responsibility to uncover the truth, but now he also feared what he would find when he dug up the past. When he returned home, Ricardo found Julia waiting for him in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, and her expression conveyed a calm unease. "We need to talk, Ricardo. I've noticed you've been absent, distant. What's going on?" Her voice was soft, but there was a firmness that Ricardo knew well. It was the tone she used when she wanted something. Ricardo took a deep breath, trying to keep control. "It's nothing much, just some concerns about work and our life here," he replied, carefully choosing his words. But he knew Julia wouldn't be satisfied with vague answers. She approached him, lightly touching his arm, but there was a coldness in her touch. Do you think I don't notice? This obsession with the past, with Helena. I thought you'd accepted what happened. Helena's name hit Ricardo like a blow, and he suppressed the urge to react aggressively. I will never forget what happened to our daughter, Julia, Ricardo responded in a grave tone. And I believe you shouldn't forget either. She narrowed her eyes and stepped back, realizing that the control of the conversation had slipped from her grasp. Either way, I hope you're not getting too involved with our nanny. It would be a shame to lose someone so dedicated, but if necessary, I'll take action. Ricardo could tell she was trying to intimidate him, but he remained calm. Mariana isn't going anywhere, Julia. She's good for Gabriel, and that's what matters. Ricardo's words left a palpable tension in the air, and he knew Julia would try to figure out what was behind his behavior. But he was also resolute. He would continue investigating and wouldn't let Julia interfere with his plans. That night, Ricardo found Mariana in Gabriel's room, reading him a bedtime story. The scene stirred a memory of Clara reading to Helena, and Ricardo felt a pang in his chest. Mariana looked at him, noticing his distant expression, and smiled understandingly. "Is everything all right, Mr. Ricardo?" He simply nodded, trying to shake off the thoughts that haunted him. "Yes, everything's fine, Mariana. Thank you for taking such good care of Gabriel." The words sounded formal, but carried a sincere gratitude that Mariana seemed to understand. When he returned to his office, Ricardo looked at the box where he kept the few memories of Helena. A worn teddy bear, a photo album yellowed with age. He knew that somewhere in those memories lay the answers to all his questions. He just wasn't sure if he was ready to face them. And so, as the night fell over the mansion, Ricardo felt that the thread of truth was closer than ever. But now, more than discovering what happened to his daughter, he needed to understand how far Julia was willing to go to keep her secrets hidden. The wind blew hard that afternoon, making the trees in the mansion's garden bend to the gusts. Mariana, while tidying up Gabriel's toys in the basement, noticed a small wooden door hidden behind an old bookshelf. The door seemed to have been unopened for a long time, and curiosity got the best of her. Without thinking much, she pushed the bookshelf aside, revealing a dusty little room that seemed to have been forgotten over the years. Inside, shrouded in dust and memories, were old trunks, some children's toys, and a closed wooden box. Mariana knelt and tried to open the box. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. Inside, there was a stack of letters, carefully tied with a faded ribbon. The delicate handwriting on the letters caught her attention. For Ricardo. Curious, Mariana picked up one of the letters and read a few lines. The words were filled with sadness and worry. Written by Clara, Ricardo's late wife. She talked about Helena, mentioning things that Mariana didn't fully understand. But one detail made her pause. Clara mentioned a secret she had been hiding from Ricardo, something she feared could change their lives forever. Mariana's heart raced. She knew she shouldn't be reading this, but something about those words seemed to connect her own past to the family she worked for. That night, while Ricardo sat silently at dinner with Julia, Mariana decided she couldn't keep this to herself. She waited until Julia went upstairs and then approached Ricardo, who was finishing his meal, deep in thought. "Mr. Ricardo, I found something today that I think you should see," she said, handing him the letters. Ricardo looked at the papers, surprised, and furrowed his brow. "Where did you get this?" Ricardo's voice was more curious than reproachful, but Mariana noticed the slight tremble in his hands as he took the letters. "They were in the basement, in an old box. I couldn't ignore it. I thought you should know." Ricardo began reading one of the letters and soon realized they were Clara's confessions in the months before her death. She talked about her worries for Helena and mentioned that there was something about their daughter that she had never had the courage to share with him. Clara's words were a mixture of love and guilt, and Ricardo's heart tightened as he remembered his wife and the pain he'd carried since her passing. After finishing the letter, he looked at Mariana, still in disbelief over what he held in his hands. "You did the right thing by showing me this, Mariana, but please don't tell Julia, not yet." Mariana nodded, concerned but trusting that Ricardo knew what he was doing. She left, returning to her room, while he stayed in the living room, absorbing the revelations. Later, when Julia came downstairs to fetch something she had forgotten, she found Ricardo still holding the letters, looking distant. "What are you reading, Ricardo?" she asked, trying to sound disinterested, but her eyes were sharp. Ricardo quickly tucked the letters into his jacket pocket, acting casual. "Just some old papers I found lying around," he replied, not giving any details. Julia frowned, suspicious, but realized she wouldn't get more out of him at that moment. She forced a smile and approached Ricardo, as she often did when she wanted to hide her intentions. "I hope you're not getting caught up in things from the past, dear. That never does anyone any good," she said sweetly, but Ricardo could feel the underlying threat. He just smiled back, a tense smile, but inside he knew he had to be more careful with every step. As midnight approached and Julia fell asleep, Ricardo returned to his office and reread every one of Clara's letters, trying to understand what she had meant. But one detail in particular made him freeze. In one of the letters, Clara mentioned a meeting with Julia where she hinted that she knew something about Helena that could change everything. Clara's writing became more confused as she talked about Julia's visit, as if she had been disoriented or afraid. Ricardo began to question how deeply Julia might have been involved in his daughter's disappearance. Could she have known something and hidden it from him all these years? His heart raced with each new doubt. He needed to confront her, but he knew that if he did so without concrete proof, Julia would deny everything and might become even more vigilant. In the days that followed, Ricardo and Mariana exchanged knowing glances, each trying to keep up appearances around Julia. With every casual conversation, Ricardo concealed his true intentions, while Mariana began to feel like a part of a dangerous game where every word could be a trap. But Ricardo had already made up his mind. No matter how long it took or how many lies were revealed, he would uncover the truth about what happened to Helena. And without realizing it, Mariana was becoming an essential piece of that puzzle. The silence of the night enveloped the mansion like a heavy cloak as Ricardo sat at his desk, rereading Clara's letters. Their contents consumed him, every word echoing in his mind and reigniting old suspicions. How could Clara have mentioned Julia back then? And why did she hint at a secret that Clara had never revealed? Each passing day made Ricardo more cautious, trying to hide his investigations from Julia. Mariana, meanwhile, had become a silent ally, sensing that Ricardo was searching for something much bigger than a mere family secret. The young nanny also felt drawn into the mystery, especially after discovering the letters hidden in the basement. It was on a cold afternoon, while Ricardo was alone in his office, that he received another call from Augusto. His friend's voice sounded heavier than usual. "I need you to come to the station. I found something important," he said, without revealing details. Ricardo left the mansion in a hurry, making up an excuse for Julia, who watched him with a suspicious look. When he arrived at the station, he found Augusto sitting behind a pile of documents, his expression serious. He greeted Ricardo with a nod and pointed to the chair in front of him. "I kept investigating the orphanage," Augusto began, sliding some papers toward Ricardo. "I found that there was a child, registered without a name, who was given to a couple irregularly. This all happened around the same time Helena disappeared. Ricardo flipped through the documents anxiously until something caught his attention. A faded photo of a small blonde girl with curly hair taken around the time Helena vanished. Though the image was aged, something in the girl's eyes made Ricardo hold his breath. "Do you think this child could be Helena?" Ricardo asked, feeling his throat dry. Augusto hesitated before answering. "I can't say for sure, but the records show she was given to a couple that could never be located. They disappeared without a trace, taking the girl with them." Ricardo felt the weight of the revelation settle on his shoulders. What if his daughter had never really disappeared? What if she had been taken by someone who knew them? The possibility was both painful and comforting. She could still be alive, somewhere. Returning home, Ricardo's determination only grew. He needed to find out how involved Julia was, and Mariana seemed to be the key to understanding this connection. He decided that night he would talk to her and reveal his suspicions. When Gabriel fell asleep, Ricardo called Mariana to the office. She entered hesitantly, sensing the tension in the air, but sat down in front of Ricardo, waiting for him to begin. He told her about Augusto's discovery, about the photo of the girl, and his suspicions that Helena might have been taken to the orphanage. "Mariana, I need your help. There's something about your story, about how you ended up in that orphanage, that might be connected to what happened to my daughter," he said, with an urgency that made Mariana swallow hard. She felt the weight of Ricardo's words, and for the first time decided to reveal something she had been hiding since she started working for him. "Mr. Ricardo, there's something I've never told you. When I was a child, I had strange dreams, flashes of memories that didn't make sense, like a woman singing to me, a room lit by moonlight. I always thought they were just dreams, but after I started taking care of Gabriel, those memories became more intense." Ricardo listened carefully, feeling they were on the right track. Mariana seemed as lost as he was, but there was a connection between her past and his own tragedy that he couldn't ignore. They needed to dig deeper, even if it meant challenging Julia and reopening wounds that had never healed. That night, as Mariana returned to her room with her mind full of doubts, Ricardo knew they were closer to the truth than ever, and that meant one thing: he would have to confront Julia, no matter the cost. Dawn brought a dense, heavy atmosphere to the mansion. Ricardo had spent the night awake, reflecting on Mariana's revelations. There was something in her flashes of memory that rang true, as if her memories echoed Ricardo's own doubts. He needed to act fast before Julia realized how much he knew. Early in the morning, Ricardo called Augusto, asking him to find more information about the couple who had taken the girl from the orphanage. If there was any record, however faint, he needed to find it. While waiting for new answers, Ricardo decided to return to the basement where Mariana had found Clara's letters. There was something about that place that intrigued him, something that perhaps had been overlooked all these years. He descended the stairs slowly, hearing the creak of the old floorboards under his feet. The faint morning light barely illuminated the basement, but he had brought a flashlight to search for any forgotten clues. When he reached the small room where Mariana had found the letters, he looked around, sensing that there were more secrets hidden there. It was then that he noticed a small crack in the wall near the floor. He knelt down, and as he ran his fingers over the crack, realized the wall felt hollow. He pushed aside a few old boxes and uncovered a small opening, blocked by a loose piece of wood. Heart pounding, he used all his strength to remove the wood. On the other side, he found a hidden compartment, dark and dusty, containing an old brown-covered journal. Ricardo opened the journal with trembling hands and immediately recognized Clara's handwriting. The entries began months before Helena's disappearance, detailing her daily life with loving care. But as he turned the pages, he saw that Clara had started to suspect something involving Julia. The final entry, written just weeks before her death, left Ricardo breathless. "I can't trust Julia. She knows more than she says, and I fear what that means for Helena. I need to protect her at all costs, but I'm afraid. Ricardo would never believe me if I told him. Maybe one day he'll find these words when it's too late for me." Ricardo slammed the journal shut, feeling a mix of anger and despair. Clara knew something was wrong, but never got the chance to tell him. The suspicion that Julia might be involved in their daughter's disappearance was becoming more real, but without proof, confronting her would be risky. That afternoon, Julia arrived home from the city earlier than usual, in an unusually light mood. "Ricardo, I've arranged a special dinner for us tonight," she said with a smile that seemed both genuine and calculated. Ricardo tried to mask his unease, but noticed Julia's gaze linger on him a little longer than normal. He accepted the invitation, knowing he had to continue acting as if nothing was happening. Mariana, aware of what Ricardo had found in the basement, spent the day worried, but remained silent, keeping herself busy with Gabriel. As night fell, Ricardo and Julia sat at the dinner table, lit by the soft glow of candles. Julia seemed more relaxed than usual, as if she were trying to regain control of the situation. Ricardo, on the other hand, couldn't shake the image of Clara's journal from his mind. The tension grew with each passing minute. Between toasts, Julia finally broke the silence. "I've noticed you and Mariana have been getting along quite well lately," she said in a casual tone, but her eyes were fixed on Ricardo, as if probing for a reaction. Ricardo held her gaze. "She takes good care of Gabrielle. She's a good person." Julia smiled, but there was a hint of sarcasm in her smile. "I'm sure she is, dear. I just hope you're not letting her get too involved in our matters." The jab was clear, but Ricardo kept his composure. "Don't worry, Julia. I know what I'm doing." Dinner continued under a thin veil of discomfort, every word loaded with unspoken intentions. When they retired to their rooms, Ricardo knew he was walking on dangerous ground. Julia was on alert, and he needed to be more careful than ever. Later, when Julia had fallen asleep, Ricardo retrieved Clara's journal and began taking pictures of the pages with his phone. He needed a copy in case anything happened. He felt he was getting closer to the truth, but that also meant the risks were growing. The next day, Ricardo called Mariana into the office. He showed her the journal and asked her to read the most important passages. Mariana, shocked, remained silent as she realized Clara had also suspected Julia. "We need concrete evidence," Ricardo said as she cautiously flipped through the journal. "Augusto is working on finding more about the couple who took the child from the orphanage. In the meantime, I'll need your help to keep Julia distracted." Mariana nodded, realizing she was now fully entangled in the mystery of this family. She didn't know where it would lead, but she trusted Ricardo. She knew something bigger than she could grasp was at stake. And so, with each passing day, the tension in the mansion grew. Ricardo and Mariana acted like silent accomplices, while Julia, sensing the shift in the air, became more suspicious, watching every small detail. The truth, now so close, was pushing them toward an inevitable confrontation where everyone would have to choose sides. The rain pounded heavily against the mansion windows, as if the sky itself reflected the storm brewing within the walls. Ricardo sat in the office, sifting through documents Augusto had given him. His head throbbed, each clue becoming a piece of a puzzle that seemed impossible to complete. Julia's name kept appearing in strange contexts, but he still couldn't put it all together. Downstairs, Mariana played with Gabriel, trying to hide the tension that was building up. She and Ricardo no longer needed to speak to understand they were treading on unfamiliar territory, surrounded by secrets that could change their lives forever. It was then that Ricardo received a message from Augusto. The former police officer was waiting for him at the same discreet cafe where they'd met before. Ricardo left the mansion without a word, driving to the meeting with a racing heart. When he arrived, he found Augusto already seated, his expression more serious than usual. "I've found something that changes everything, Ricardo," Augusto said, before he could even sit down. There was an urgent tension in his voice. Ricardo sat, anxious to hear the news. Augusto placed a thick envelope on the table, which seemed to weigh more than its physical content. "This is the adoption record of the girl I mentioned before. And there's more. I tracked down the couple who took her. They were using false identities, but I managed to find out who they really were." Ricardo opened the envelope with trembling hands, seeing photos, names, and documents detailing the couple's trail. But what really made him stop breathing was the last sheet. Julia had been the one to facilitate the irregular adoption of the girl, using an underground network to cover her tracks. "Julia was involved from the start," Augusto stated, his voice firm. "She knew about the illegal adoptions and somehow helped that girl get into the orphanage." Ricardo's world collapsed in that moment. All of Clara's suspicions had been correct, and the proof was right there, undeniable. Julia, the woman he loved and thought he could trust after Clara's death, was at the heart of the mystery. "We still don't know why, Ricardo. It's not clear why she would do this. But the fact is, Julia was connected to that couple," Augusto continued, his eyes fixed on the documents. "And Mariana, there's a chance she is Helena." Ricardo nearly dropped the papers. "Mariana, Helena," he repeated, unable to believe what he was hearing. Could it be? Mariana seemed so familiar, but he'd never imagined his own daughter had been living under the same roof, unknown to him. "We need a DNA test," Augusto said bluntly. "It's the only way to be sure." Ricardo nodded, his face pale with shock. Everything was changing too quickly, and the rage of being manipulated by Julia consumed him. But at the same time, the hope that Mariana might be his daughter gave him new energy, a reason to keep going. When he returned home, Ricardo found Mariana in the living room, organizing Gabriel's toys. He called her into the office, his expression serious, making her realize something significant had changed. "Mariana, I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice trembling. "I know this is going to sound strange, but I need a DNA test. There's a chance you're my daughter." Mariana froze, her eyes wide. "What? Mr. Ricardo, how is that possible?" Ricardo quickly explained about the documents Augusto had discovered, the story of the illegal adoptions, and how Julia was involved. Mariana listened in silence, her face shifting from shock to disbelief, and finally to deep sadness. "I never knew who my parents were. The orphanage found me alone, with nothing to indicate where I came from," she said, her voice choked. "But if there's a chance, I'll take the test." They decided to move quickly without Julia knowing anything. Ricardo asked Augusto to arrange everything discreetly. Meanwhile, Mariana, though scared, tried to keep up the routine with Gabriel. But Ricardo's distant gaze made it clear they were on the brink of a major revelation. That night at dinner, Julia sensed something was off. Mariana barely touched her food, and Ricardo was more distant than ever. She tried to start a conversation, but he only replied in monosyllables, clearly hiding something. "You're different, Ricardo," Julia commented, giving him a suspicious look. "Is something going on?" He looked her in the eyes, and for the first time didn't look away. "Yes, Julia, something's going on, and soon we're going to find out what really happened to Helena." Julia paused, surprised by Ricardo's unexpected frankness. The tension between them was palpable, and she felt she was losing control. But she didn't reply, keeping a forced smile that barely masked the fear beginning to creep in. As the night wore on, Ricardo and Mariana knew they were one step away from discovering the truth. The DNA test was the key to everything, and both awaited, with heavy hearts and growing anxiety, for what the future would reveal. The atmosphere in the mansion grew heavier with each passing day, and the tension between Ricardo and Julia was on the verge of breaking. Mariana tried to keep up her routine, but the anticipation of the DNA results consumed her. Ricardo also remained silent, avoiding any direct confrontation with Julia until he had concrete proof in hand. When Augusto's call finally came, Ricardo answered with his heart racing. "The results are ready," Augusto said, and his tone carried unmistakable gravity. "We need to meet as soon as possible." Ricardo left the mansion in a rush, telling Julia he had an important meeting in the city. She didn't question him, but watched his departure with a suspicious look. When he arrived at the agreed-upon location, a small office in a discreet building, Ricardo found Augusto holding a thick, sealed white envelope. "Are you ready for this?" Augusto asked, offering the envelope to Ricardo. Ricardo hesitated for a moment before taking it. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal and began reading the results. With each line, his eyes scanned, his breathing grew shallower. Finally, he stopped and looked at Augusto, his expression a mix of shock and relief. "It's true. Mariana is my daughter. She's Helena," Ricardo said, his voice nearly breaking. Augusto nodded in silence, respecting his friend's moment. "We have the proof you needed, Ricardo. Now it's up to you. What will you do next?" Ricardo felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Mariana was truly his daughter, alive and within reach, but what to do with this information? And how to confront Julia, now that he knew just how deeply she was involved? Upon returning to the mansion, Ricardo asked Mariana to come into the office. She entered hesitantly, clearly nervous, and he took her hands, squeezing them gently. "Mariana, you're Helena," he said bluntly. Her eyes widened, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. "I've always felt a connection to you, but I never imagined it was this," Mariana responded, her voice thick with emotion. Father and daughter embraced, both trying to process the enormity of the revelation. The moment was overwhelming, and for a brief second, all the secrets and pain of the past faded away. But reality caught up with them far too quickly. They had to decide how to deal with Julia and uncover just how deep her lies went. Ricardo knew that the confrontation could no longer be postponed. That night, while Julia was in the kitchen preparing tea, Ricardo and Mariana approached her, their expressions serious and resolute. Julia looked at them with a curious smile, but her demeanor shifted as she sensed the tension between father and daughter. "We need to talk, Julia," Ricardo said in a tone that left no room for refusal. She calmly set the kettle down, but her expression hardened. "Of course. What's going on?" Ricardo looked at Mariana, who took a deep breath before beginning. "I'm Helena, and now we know what you did." Shock briefly flashed across Julia's face before disappearing, replaced by a calculated coldness. "What are you talking about? This is ridiculous," she laughed, but the tension in her voice was unmistakable. Ricardo wasted no time and placed the DNA report on the table, the results clearly visible. "Stop lying, Julia. We have proof that Mariana is Helena, our daughter, and you were involved in her disappearance." Julia froze, her eyes locked on the paper in front of her. The indifferent mask she had been wearing slowly crumbled, and Ricardo saw something he never expected, regret and fear in her eyes. She stepped back, her breathing quickening, as if desperately searching for a way out. "You don't understand, Ricardo. I did what had to be done." she said bitterly, her voice trembling. Clara was sick, losing her mind. She wanted to hide Helena, to take her away from everyone, thinking she was protecting her. I saved her from herself. Julia's words hit Ricardo like a weight on his shoulders. He looked at Mariana, trying to comprehend the significance of that revelation. But Mariana was frozen, trying to absorb the idea that everything she thought she knew about her past was a lie. You helped take our daughter away from us? Why? Ricardo asked, his voice thick with anger and confusion. Julia met his gaze, now colder than ever. Because I loved you, Ricardo. I always wanted to be the woman you would love, and Clara knew that. She wanted to burn everything around us, but I saw a chance to keep you with me, to rebuild everything. I never imagined she'd die so quickly, and by the time it happened, it was too late to turn back. Ricardo felt a mix of hatred and compassion as Julia spoke. There was no justification for what she had done, but somehow he understood her desperation. You destroyed our lives, Julia, and now you'll have to answer for it. Mariana, still in shock, finally pulled herself together. You stole me from my parents, she said, her voice trembling but firm. There's no excuse for what you did. I want the truth, all of it. Julia, realizing she had lost control, seemed to surrender. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes were empty, as if the truth had finally freed her from a prison she had built herself. She began to confess everything, unraveling long-buried secrets. As Julia's confession unfolded before them, the cruel and irreversible truth emerged. Ricardo and Mariana now knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The air inside the mansion felt thick, almost suffocating, as Julia broke down in tears, confessing what she had done. Mariana and Ricardo listened, stunned, as all the pieces of the past painfully fell into place. Julia's story was filled with regret, but also with twisted justifications, revealing how her actions had been driven by jealousy, fear, and a distorted obsession with control. Julia recounted how years ago, Clara had become increasingly paranoid, obsessed with the idea of protecting Helena from some unknown threat. According to Julia, Clara was convinced there was danger within the family itself, and she began isolating Helena from everyone, including Ricardo. Feeling rejected and watching Clara's mental health deteriorate, Julia got closer to her, earning her trust. It was during this time that Clara confided her plan to flee with their daughter to a safe place, away from any perceived threats. She was out of her mind, Ricardo, Julia explained, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to disappear with Helena and not tell you. I thought I was doing the right thing by stepping in. I believed that by putting Helena up for adoption, I was protecting her from Clara and her madness. Mariana listened, her breathing heavy, trying to process everything she was hearing about her real mother and Julia's twisted role in her past. Anger mixed with relief at finally knowing the truth, but the weight of betrayal left her speechless. Ricardo, on the other hand, struggled to remain calm as Julia spoke, feeling the pain of realizing that everything he had known about Clara had been manipulated. And the fake documents, the false identities, how could you go that far? Ricardo questioned, trying not to raise his voice. Julia sighed, looking exhausted. I knew that if Clara disappeared with Helena, you'd never forgive me. So I found a way to create a new life for her, with adoptive parents who wouldn't ask questions. I used my contacts to erase the records and crafted a story to ensure you'd never discover the truth. But Clara died, and Julia found herself trapped in her secret. From that moment on, any chance of redemption was gone, and she continued to build a life with Ricardo, as if nothing had happened. The guilt consumed her, but the fear of losing what she had gained was greater. When she finished speaking, the silence in the room was deafening. Ricardo felt the weight of every word she had said, the years of deception, the lies hidden in the shadows of the mansion. He looked at Mariana, seeing the pain in her face, and knew they had to do something to make it right. "Julia, you will pay for what you've done," Ricardo said with dangerous calm. "Not just for me, but for Mariana. You stole her life. You took away our chance to be a family." Julia remained silent, the tears still falling, but something inside her seemed to break. She nodded slowly, as if accepting what was to come. Mariana, though still in shock, had a newfound strength in her gaze, as if she had finally found a purpose. In the days that followed, the house became a minefield of emotions and difficult decisions. Mariana decided she needed time away from the mansion to process everything she had learned. She said a loving goodbye to Gabriel, promising to return, but made it clear that she needed space to rebuild her identity. Ricardo respected her decision, understanding that she needed distance to figure out her place in the world. Ricardo, for his part, was determined to resolve everything legally. He gathered all the documents and evidence Augusto had uncovered, as well as Julia's confession, and brought everything to the authorities. He knew it would mean facing an investigation and exposing the family's history to the public, but it was the only way he saw to ensure that the past wouldn't continue to haunt them. Julia, accepting her guilt, cooperated with the police. The once confident and controlling figure she had been was now just a shadow of her former self. She was taken away by the police on a cloudy morning without resistance, as Ricardo watched from the window. There was a mix of relief and sadness in his eyes, but he knew it was the only possible outcome. Without Julia, the mansion felt empty and quiet. Ricardo focused on Gabriel, determined to give his son a happy and peaceful life. He knew that sooner or later he would have to tell Gabriel the truth about the family's history, but for now, he cherished the calm moments with his son. Months later, Mariana returned to the mansion. There was a new glow in her eyes, a certainty that hadn't been there before. She had rebuilt her life outside the mansion, but knew she needed to confront Ricardo one last time. "Dad, I want to try to build something new, but on my own terms," she said when they met in the office, the place where so many revelations had unfolded. Ricardo nodded, emotional. "You'll always have a place here, Mariana, and I'll be by your side, whatever you decide." Mariana smiled, feeling that a part of her had finally found peace. She knew the journey was just beginning, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. Father and daughter, united by pain, now allowed themselves to dream of a future free from the ghosts of the past. The sun shone brightly over the mansion, illuminating every corner of the gardens, as if trying to wash away the shadows that had hidden there for so many years. It was a new beginning, and the weight of the past was finally giving way to the hope of a different future. In the months that followed Julia's arrest, Ricardo and Mariana worked on rebuilding the relationship that had been stolen from them. Mariana still preferred living outside the mansion in a modest house in the city, but she visited her father and Gabriel regularly. The emotional scars remained, but both made a genuine effort to overcome the pain and rediscover the bonds they had lost. One morning, Ricardo was in the garden, planting new flowers alongside Gabriel, who was now 5 years old and growing more curious about the world around him every day. The boy was happy, and Ricardo was committed to ensuring that Gabriel had the childhood Helena never had. As they tended to the garden, the mansion's gate opened, and Mariana walked in with a peaceful smile on her face. She carried a box of old books that had belonged to Clara, determined to share more memories with her father. It was an attempt to rediscover Clara in a way she had never imagined possible. "I decided to go through these old books," Mariana said, showing Ricardo the box. "I feel like there's still a part of me that needs to understand my mother better." Ricardo smiled, understanding what that meant. They spent the morning flipping through the books together, recalling stories Clara used to tell Ricardo when they were young, and sharing laughs and memories that they could now revisit without the intense pain that once haunted them. Later, they decided to take a walk around the property. Ricardo watched his daughter with pride. She had become a strong and determined woman despite the circumstances. Mariana, in turn, felt freer, as if every step alongside her father solidified the peace she had long sought. It was then that they reached the old basement where Mariana had found Clara's letters months before. Ricardo hesitated for a moment, but decided it was finally time to clear out the place. Together, father and daughter began removing boxes, old furniture, and various pieces that no longer belonged there. It was like cleansing the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Among the items, they found an old photo album that had been forgotten. Ricardo opened it carefully, revealing faded images of Helena as a child. Mariana looked at the photos, recognizing in the young girl's face traces of herself that she hadn't known before. There was a sense of nostalgia, but also acceptance. She finally knew who she was and where she came from. When they reached the end of the album, they found, tucked between the pages, a photo of Clara, young and smiling, holding Helena in her arms, with Ricardo by her side. It was a picture Ricardo hadn't seen in years, and tears finally rolled down his face, not out of sadness, but out of longing and gratitude for the time they had shared. "She loved you," Mariana said, holding the photo tenderly, "and somehow I feel like I can get to know her a little better through you." Ricardo embraced Mariana, feeling the warmth of the daughter he thought he had lost forever. It was a moment of reconciliation, of acceptance, and of silent promises for the future. They knew there was still much to heal, but they were willing to move forward together. That night, Mariana stayed for dinner at the mansion, and they decided to have a simple meal in the garden under the stars. Gabriel ran around them, laughing and playing, while Mariana and Ricardo talked about future plans. Mariana had decided to go back to school, explore more of her past, and perhaps build a career to help other children who, like her, grew up without knowing who they were. "I want to find a way to help children without homes, like I was once. Maybe create an organization, something that can give them what I never had," she said, her eyes filled with renewed conviction. Ricardo immediately supported the idea, promising to help her build the project. He felt that this new mission was a way for Clara, Mariana, and himself to stay connected in a positive and transformative way. It was as if the pain of the past was being turned into something greater, something that could change the world around them. As the night wore on, the starry sky seemed to offer a silent promise of better days. Mariana looked at her father, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace, no longer carrying the weight of an unknown past. Ricardo, in turn, allowed himself to relax, knowing that despite all the lies and deceptions, he had the chance to rebuild his family, to start over. Gabriel curled up in Mariana's lap, asking her to sing a lullaby. Without hesitation, she began to sing the melody that Clara had once sung years before. Her voice was soft, and the song seemed to echo through every corner of the mansion, bringing a sense of peace that had long been absent. Ricardo watched, emotional, feeling that they had finally reached the end of a long journey. The past was resolved, the lies had been uncovered, and the future, uncertain as it was, seemed to shine with new hope. As the stars twinkled above the old mansion, the echo of a new family, rebuilt by love, lingered in the air. It was the beginning of a different story, one without secrets, without fear, marked only by the desire to move forward together, ready to face whatever came side by side. And so, under the light of the stars, life in the mansion, once filled with secrets, began anew. Not as an ending, but as a fresh and promising start. Thank you for following this emotional journey to the end. If you enjoyed this story filled with mysteries, secrets, and revelations, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss out on future videos. It really helps us continue bringing stories like this to you. Now we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Ricardo's shoes when he discovered that Mariana was actually Helena? Would you have confronted Julia differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're curious to know how you would have handled this twist. Also, what was the most impactful moment in the story for you? Comment below. Your engagement makes all the difference and helps keep our channel alive and full of new, intriguing stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.